Well, good morning. We might have a little video interference today. If that happens, we'll keep recording. Just the important thing is just to listen to my voice as we talk about a very crucial aspect of the process of becoming a very clear, open portal. This is your highest function. Remember, the function to serve, to become empty and serve as a channel through which eternity, the unmanifested God, can use you for its expression. And this is your happiness. This is this is everything. This is your evolution as a species into Homo glimulus, Homo spiritus, is to become this, to identify with this, to let go of tribal and egoic attachments that would be interference patterns, okay? So we've talked before about how everyone, if they're called to serve in this way, their unfinished business, what is often called karma, will get in the way. I was just reading, in fact, a story about Bo Lozoff, who was a key influence for me Louis, in doing prison work. And, like so many channels, and you see this in all of these high-level channels or teachers, that whatever unfinished karma they have will affect, it will flavor, it will taint the message as it's coming through, and it certainly will affect their lives. So many individuals, especially men, for example, if they have unfinished karmic business, their attraction to power, to sex, to money, to whatever, will interfere with their ability to be a very clear, open channel, okay? And you see many lives, like Bo Lozoff, he even said, boy, God made a big mistake, picking me to be like the leader of a community, because he got into all kinds of trouble. He was married, but had all kinds of, he sort of developed a technique of therapy that involved sexual contact with his clients. And, of course, that caused a big scandal. And, this kind of thing happens all the time. And it happens in those that have a charismatic power, but they also have unfinished karmic business until they get brought down by that. Bo, at a relatively young age, was killed in a motorcycle accident in Hawaii. And it's like I had mentioned before, some of these Trungpa and Alan Watts and Osho, individuals that clearly had a great gift, very charismatic gift, because again, this power coming through you it's energy, and it's enthusiasm, it's love, it's light, it's a beautiful thing. But this is why, again, Louis had received this early mantra from Claire, his first spiritual mentor, saying, pray to stay small. So one of the things that happened, of course, in Louis' story is that this publishing contract with Hazelden wasn't meant to happen, okay? And this actually happened 3 different times with writing projects he had. He had a project that was accepted by a publishing company, and then there was some interference that erupted and stopped the project. This would be beneficial, okay, if Louis, as a in this process of me, Sun King, grooming Louis for high-level transmissions, it would behoove him not to be bogged down by a writing contract or having a best-selling book published, and then he has to go on a book tour and do this and do that. And it's like you can see how Eckhart Tolle's work was deeply influenced, okay? His masterpiece, The Power of Now, came out in '99, and then a big-time publishing company, Dutton, convinced him to really dumb down his material so it could be a bigger publication in his book, A New Earth. So again, it's not a bad thing, it's not a wrong thing. There's lots of channels, Deepak Chopra and many, that their job was to basically take high-level spiritual truth and put it into a, sort of kindergarten, early elementary school format so that many, many people could understand it. Okay, as we're evolving, okay, as you are evolving, but I'm here working with you in this evolution, there's a call now for a much higher level of truth, okay, a much higher level of power. And it's necessary if, again, this evolution that you are being called to participate in involves dropping tribal and karmic attachments, that a messenger like Louis that's being groomed to be a high-level messenger, he needs to drop his karmic material, okay, become free of the karmic burden that comes from events in this lifetime and past lifetimes. Okay, so witness with me, please, what will happen. Okay, 1990, remember Easter, this was kind of the end of this affirmation from Jesus regarding Louis' sister Lynn's death, her memorial service, and then Easter Sunday with Reverend Carlos Anderson, just experiencing a massively high level transmission on Easter Sunday that easily could have killed him if he wasn't ready at some level to receive and transmit this. Okay, so now the work is going to continue the nitty-gritty of what I'm calling karmic return, undoing karmic burdens, okay, from, again, his childhood experiences in this life, that which could have easily been a lifelong interference pattern, or also past life karmic attachment, karmic energy. So it's really pretty amazing to watch. And again, Louis was so open to my guidance that shortly after things, he came back from doing Lynn's memorial service. Now it's like early September or whatever, and he gets the news about the writing contract being canceled, and so now he's decided to stay in the Twin Cities. What's he going to do? Somehow there's a connection. I think through Unity Church, sees a message to this woman in St. Paul's looking for a housemate. Louis thinks, wow, I think that's what I'm supposed to do. So he contacts this woman. They meet. She agrees right away. Louis moves in, and this is setting up a situation. As it turns out, this woman is going to facilitate a gender exploration, gender issues, with a group for women, for men. The 3 other men that are already in the group have all been through this New Warrior Adventure Training Weekend. They're part of this thing that would evolve into the Mankind Project. Louis naturally is going to get influenced by these 3 men. He gets drawn into this possibility of being initiated, and this work is so key because Louis living in this area in Minnesota where the book Iron John, okay, was written by Robert Bly. Robert Bly was a longtime Minnesotan, and he sort of became the de facto influence, not necessarily the leader, but the influence of what would come to be called men's work. Okay, men having the opportunity to get more involved the way women always had in sort of group therapy, getting in touch with childhood emotional wounds and damage. And it's just a beautiful way that men could, with other men, do some very intensive healing and growth. And, it's kind of based on this idea of the medicine wheel, the four archetypes, the lover, the warrior, the magician, the king, and I've talked about that, or Louis talked about that in some of his writing, the Circle of Life, the Way of Transformation. So anyway, this is the warrior work, okay? That the lover, the young boy, being wounded, he, goes out into the world, and many times he's pretty hapless in his ability to accomplish things, to have a successful life, because he doesn't have a strong sort of warrior archetype. And so this, this idea that Bly put out had to do with the fact that in older cultures, there was always a way in which a young boy, 12, 13, 14, would be initiated. Okay, that a group of men in the community would take the young boy, or take the young, the adolescent, and give him some adventure, give him something that would give him a sense of strength, that would help him build this sense of, this warrior archetype that would defend. It's similar to the development of the ego, which is a defensive structure, but in this more archetypal way, this warrior archetype would be this strong, powerful, way of confronting wrongs and correcting wrongs, and moving forward in a good way in one's life. So in August of 1990, Louis went through this initiation in Hamer Woods, Wisconsin, where the whole New Warrior Adventure Training Weekend began, and it was a very powerful experience for Louis to get in touch with this core wound that he had with his father, being more or less an unloving, absent father. And this is, pretty classic. Most men have usually a core wound with their dad, and then perhaps a corollary wound with their mother. So it's a matter of just getting in touch with this, feeling the feelings that usually have been repressed for many years, and choosing to do whatever possible to repair the wound, and possibly even develop a better relationship with one's father or one's mother. Again, this is the karmic journey in this lifetime. And so I remember, because Louis shared about his experience after going through treatment in 1985, that he couldn't see his father for 5 years. Well, it worked out perfectly that in August of 1990, he did this warrior training, and he knew right away he needed to travel back east and give his father a blessing. Actually, Louis knew that he needed the blessing. He wasn't going back to get his father's blessing. He was going back to give his father a blessing. And this is pretty amazing. This is where Byron Katie's, the work comes in, where there's this reversal. She would say that, if you have this problem, like if you have this core belief that says, well, my father didn't love me enough, she would take a person through this process of the work, where there would be this reversal, where you realize, wow, maybe I didn't love my father enough. So this is what Louis came to realize via this thing, is that, he could repair this wound with his father to some degree by him taking action, by him being in this warrior archetype and going back. And so what he decided to do, this is pretty interesting, that he had just recently bought a new vehicle, a pickup truck, and he arranged he didn't really have a whole lot of cash on hand, so he arranged to help this fellow move his wife and kids and his things from Minneapolis to New York City. This fellow was a medical student from India, and he was going to move. He was continuing his education in New York. So anyway, he was moving his young family to Queens, New York, and Louis would pull a trailer with all of his belongings. And the guy would pay all Louis's expenses round trip. And this afforded Louis the possibility of going to visit his dad. And it was very sweet. He had this idea that he would buy a couple cigars, and his plan was to take his little tape recorder and sit down with his dad on his father's front step and interview his dad about his life, maybe for an hour, ask him questions. And this would be a way of honoring his father, which again was part of honoring himself as his father's son, his father's only son. Anyway, that whole thing happened, and that began a new relationship with his father, because as he said, he had said in 1985, okay, no more, like no more am I the wounded son of daddy. Now, as a young warrior, I'm going to be like, a young man honoring his father as best he can. And the thing that was interesting is that even though this process began, it was still a painful process. Louis would still, in spite of all of his efforts, he still, for the longest time, it would actually take him almost 20 years longer. Well, this is 1990, it'd take him 15 years. It wasn't until 2005 that Louis could do a completion piece with his dad, but we'll save that for later. But he began the process here in 1990 of healing this core wound, okay, in his life. Similarly, it's so fascinating how this happened, because, okay, so Louis was, this is now late 1990, Louis offering some volunteer counseling at this center that was supported by the fellow David Winton, okay, in Minneapolis. Louis was giving this as volunteer work. He had a client come in, this young woman, that told this story about this ordeal she was going through. She was the secretary for this same person, David Winton, who was funding this sort of open door healing center. She was his secretary, and one of the jobs he had given her to accomplish was to hire a new chef chauffeur for David's mother, Catherine Winton. And she was a very difficult person, and blah, blah, blah. So the woman was just kind of sharing her personal dilemma about this process. And Louis listened, and Louis had this knowing that he was supposed to take this job as the chef chauffeur. So he waited until the end of the therapeutic hour. After they de-rolled, he said to this young woman, he said, this might sound really peculiar, but I had a very strong inclination when you were sharing the story that I was supposed to take this job. And she looks at Louis like, really? So I think she was quite fond of Louis. So I think they'd had a few sessions together. Anyway, she set up an interview for Louis with David Winton and his wife Penny. So here, a few days later, because I think there was kind of an urgency, because the matriarch, Catherine Winton, wintered in Florida, but she had fired her former live-in chef chauffeur, this woman, and they'd always hired sort of middle-aged women to take this job. So here's the young man interviewing in David Winton's office. This is the wealthiest family, okay, in Minnesota, and probably one of the wealthiest families in the United States. So, the office on the top of the IDS tower, the penthouse, Louis sitting there with David and his wife Penny. and they're just having a chat and like, you're a well-educated young man, la, 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 la. Why would you want this job? Typically we hire this, like I say, this middle-aged woman to live above the garage on the house in Deep Haven and the quarters down in Florida. It was just so peculiar because, again, I'm watching this whole thing. I'm orchestrating this whole thing, Sun King. And here's like this sort of improbable, if not impossible, improbable situation. Why would they hire him? Because they kind of asked him, like, why would you want this job? And it just came to Louis to say, well, I'm a writer, and especially, this idea of going down to Florida, because they thought he would just be bored to tears. There's nothing to do other than just make the 3 meals. And Mrs. Winton, the matriarch, she was 98 years old. She didn't have a very active social life. So there wasn't going to be much driving her around, much entertaining, much of anything, just the two of them sitting for 3.5 months down in Florida in this house on the beach. And so Louis just said, well, I have this writing project in mind. It would be perfect, 4 months to just have nothing to do outside of making Mrs. Winton's meals to write my book. So I remember David looking at his wife Penny, and they're like, well, he seems like a nice young man. Why not? So they hired me, or Louis, and within a few days, because they were waiting, I think it was already into like early January, perhaps. And usually she went down in late November and was down there for the whole, longer winter. So Louis packed up a few things and they flew him down there. I guess they flew together. I remember it's kind of cute, Louis never having an experience of this in this lifetime, but remember the connection to his last lifetime. This family was so wealthy that instead of having their driver drive their Lexus down to Florida, they flew down and just rented a Lexus for the whole winter. Can you imagine how much it cost? It was so funny because this is so new and Louis hardly knows Mrs. Winton at all. But they go into the rental car place and, Mrs. Winton has to sign the form and show her ID. And this young girl behind the counter of the automobile rental place, she's looking at Mrs. Winton's ID and she can't quite fathom because it shows her birth date was like 1887. Like she couldn't fathom someone that old. Anyway, it was very cute. The whole thing for Louis was this amazing. At the time he wasn't putting these pieces together, but those of you who have listened to the earlier talks recall that Louis did a past life regression and he was part of the J.P. Morgan family. In fact, it was likely he was J.P. Morgan Jr. He was had this deep love for his friend Shenani and also a deep affection for the Chinese gardener. And, in that lifetime, he ached to be connected with the servant class. These were like really happy people. And the people in his class, these elites, these were not happy people. And he was not a happy person as an older man. He was an alcoholic and died a tragic death and had a horrible marriage to another banking family's daughter. And this is, so now he's in the Winton family. Okay, the Winton family, the Wintons were, along with the Warehousers, they lumbered all of the Pacific Northwest. And Catherine's father was the president, the owner of the biggest bank, now Bank of America. Then it had a different name, but so he's found his place that he'd looked for, right, in the past life, to be a servant. He just really enjoyed, the idea of being a servant for a wealthy family was much more enjoyable than being a member of the wealthy family. Most egoic structures, they would think, oh, are you kidding? It's much more enjoyable to be one of the elite. And in fact, that's not true. Louis saw the other side. So here's this karmic return, bringing things into balance. He saw how miserable these people, the elites, are. Mrs. Winton, he asked her once, like, Mrs. Winton, why do you change your clothes for every meal? She put on a new suit, and she always had to buy all her clothes from the Oval Room, Dayton's Oval Room, because, you know, back before there was like easy access to designer clothing. You had like your local designers making you these suits, these elegant suits. And so Louis asked her, what, you know, 'cause we're down in Florida. The only person she sees all day is Louis. And so he asked her, why do you change your outfit for every meal? She goes, well, that's just what is done. And on occasion, I think probably maybe like once a week, she would go to the country club in Palm Beach, of course, where there were members, and, you know, to have lunch with a friend. You know, she didn't really have and so many friends anymore. At 98, she's kind of outlived all her friends. But that's just what is done. So it was very cute to see this kind of little prison that they live in, and Louis was pretty amazed. It was also fascinating. This is part of Louis's karmic thing, working out, you know, because his mother had perhaps too much affection for him. And so here now is this 98-year-old woman who more or less falls in love with Louis. She becomes very affectionate with Louis, always wants to walk with him and hold his arm. And at the time, you know, this is part of the new warrior thing. Louis is like smoking cigars. And in Florida, but also back in their home in Deep Haven, Minnesota, they would walk around I forget what you call it, but the big circle in front of the house, the drive, walk, you know, she'd hold his arm, and Louis, she always wanted him to smoke a cigar because that's what her father did, and that's what her husband did. And again, she became very enamored with Louis, and she would tell everybody. She was, of course, getting a little bit dotty. She just had no inhibitions anymore. So she would tell anybody. And so Louis oftentimes would escort her to events, and you would meet Hubert Humphrey and, you know, the Pillsburys and the Daytons and all the wealthiest people. She would have to go to any of these social events, like opening of a new wing of the museum or whatever, which her family was paying for. You know, again, the super, super wealthy people. And she'd introduce Louis. There's been 3 men in my life: my father, my husband, and now Louis. You see everybody whispering, like, oh my God, what's going on with Kay? What's going on with Kay and this 38-year-old Louis? Very, very funny. But it was fascinating. It was fascinating for, again, Louis to be on the inside and have this thing that had happened to him in his former life, him being the elite, being in love with his servant, and now here's this elite person being in love with him. It caused quite a problem, her affection for Louis, because the daughter, David's sister, Margaret, I think her name was, she was very, very jealous, very suspicious, right? Because now she's in her karmic stuff. Her mom had never loved her enough. And now she's watching her mom love this servant, this chef chauffeur, Louis. And so she caused all kinds of problems and eventually would get Louis fired. But Louis was in this thing for almost 2 years, 1 year and 10 months, I think it was, two winters in Florida and one full summer in Minnesota. It was fascinating. Just little insights that Louis got to see. Mrs. Winton wanted to do all these things for Louis. She wanted, when she knew he was a writer, she wanted to pay to publish, you know, a book, you know, hardcover publish 100 copies or whatever. This is what all the rich people did. Or she even showed me her father had the book, hardcover book that he had written, sort of his autobiography. Her husband had his book, his autobiography, because, you know, these are famous people, important people. And then so she had a paperback copy of one of my book, Louis's books, sorry, on top of her husband and her father's books in her sala, in her mansion. Very, very cute. She would hear Louis singing sometimes up in his apartment. And she said, wow, you really enjoy singing, don't you? Oh, sure, I enjoy it. I have a fascination with Luciano Pavarotti. I always had this idea someday, not professionally, but just for fun, that I would sing Nessun Dorma. And she goes, well, I'm going to pay for you to take opera singing lessons at McPhail Institute in Minneapolis. And so she did. So Louis was taking singing lessons. Of course, I never got to opera. They always start you with show tunes and all that. But she wanted to publish his book. She wanted to buy him flying lessons. She wanted to pay for his singing lessons. She spent about $6,000 to fix Louis's teeth. It was very, very adorable. So because she was doing these things and she probably wanted to do more, her daughter put the kibosh on everything, like, you know, thinking that Mrs. Winton, her dotty old mother, is going to give Louis the porcelain china or the fur coats, or so she started locking up all of the expensive things, thinking not that I would steal them, but her mother would just, you know, give something to Louis, like, here, take this. You can take this downtown and sell it for $10,000. It's very cute. So locking up all the treasures, very, very crazy. One of the things that was fascinating, Louis learned, was that because they bugged his apartment, the daughter and her son, she had her son start spying on Louis. They bugged the apartment and looked through his mail and things like this. And I mean, at the time, Louis thought, wow, that doesn't seem right. I know there's these rights to privacy. And he actually investigated it. He said, you know, the rights to privacy that most humans had, at least now I think in USA, most people have lost their rights to privacy. The government has much more leeway to spy on you, break into your space, whatever. But there was a law passed in the 1970s, personal rights to privacy laws, but it doesn't apply to domestic servants. And Louis thought that was fascinating. He thought if he had the ambition to do so, he probably could have started a class action lawsuit. Because, you know, why would domestic servants not have basic human rights? But they don't, at least in a number of states, including Minnesota. They don't have rights to privacy. So you could break into their personal space, you could open their mail, you could put a wire, a bug on their telephone or whatever. So a fascinating experience. Again, this is part of this idea of karmic return, okay? That Louis is working out things with his dad, with his mom, but even with past lifetime residual things. So, you know, why did Louis come into this lifetime just having this natural hatred, distrust of bankers, of finance, of all these things? And it just was something that, so it really helped Louis to see it from the inside. Like, oh, wow, I was a part of that. And so needing to let it go. This is, again, the idea that for Louis to become a clear, unencumbered channel for me, Sun King, he would need to find ways to undo any of this karmic baggage that, again, most humans are carrying. And most humans, you can predict their behavior, their activities based on their karmic baggage, okay? Unfinished business will create agendas because the person's always trying to work out these bits, okay? So so the New Warrior thing in August of 90, you know, working with Mrs. Winton through all of 91 and most of 1992, it was all this one thing, this cleansing thing. And the peak of it would be that Louis had this idea that he had to do something really remarkable for his 40th birthday. And he didn't know exactly what it was. He had made a friend with this artist person in Minneapolis, and she shared with him this idea because she had this fascination with going to India. She had a friend who'd gone to India and did this pilgrimage. And even though it wasn't really something that was like Louis was keen about, he developed this idea that, wow, I guess a pilgrimage, doing the Hindu pilgrimage from New Delhi to Gangotri, that would be a pretty radical thing. I mean, Louis didn't have any real fascination with India, but he did with Nepal. And his vision would be, if they did this 30-day pilgrimage, that it could end not at Gangotri, India, but actually in Kathmandu, Nepal. So this became a fascination. And because Louis' birthday is in September, they should do this pilgrimage in August. And so this is going to be our next story. How, again, whatever unfinished business, and now we're probably talking of something karmic that's more global. I mean, why would Louis, who had really no connection with India or Hinduism, although he was very fascinated with Tibetan Buddhism and Taoism and Zen Buddhism and many Asian things, but not particularly India, why would Louis need to go to India and do a Hindu pilgrimage? Stay tuned. Next story. It'll be interesting. It's all very interesting. It's very important that you hear this, that, this is, again, Louis' own personal karmic return, but you have one also. Okay, and so it's key to really understand, if you want to step into mastery, how necessary it is to have unloaded this baggage first. Okay, you can only go through the stories. Imagine it's like dropping your body. But if you want to be free, and this is a big thing that I would, that Louis has been teaching about this idea of conscious dying. If you want to truly become free, if not in this lifetime, the next, it's really beneficial that you consciously die as best you can to your karmic baggage in this lifetime. Okay, so if it can't benefit you in this lifetime, I guarantee you it'll benefit you in the next. Namaste. Blessings to you. I love you so much.